Hello aspirants, welcome to IAS Icons by Unacademy. My name is Shubham Sardhalia. I'm your educator and mentor in UPSC preparation. For all those who are joining me for the first time, I just want to tell you that in this special lecture series, we have been discussing about NCERTs, which become really important as the part of UPSC syllabus. Time and again, you have been told to read NCERTs, but still students face certain confusions that in what way NCERT is to be read. Do we need to memorize it? Do we need to remember each and everything written? So in order to bring an end to all those confusions, all those doubts, I have started this series. Here we will be discussing NCRTs in such a manner that I'll explain you the entire text and will give you certain notes which you need to revise, which you need to memorize for the examinations to come. I request you all to join at the earliest so that we can start with our today's discussion. Proceeding further, if you are aiming to appear in UPSC examination, you ultimately your goal is to qualify this examination. If you wish to qualify this examination, you have to enroll with the largest learning platform of the country, that is Unacademy. Sir, we at Unacademy offer you widest choice of educators. You can start your course and you can watch the videos unlimited times. You get flexibility to change your course, you get printed comprehensive notes, you get end-to-end mentorship, we give you live end-to-end preparation, we give you live mentorship, you get daily answer writing practice, doubt solving sessions. So all these things together will help you qualify this examination, and people just like you who are the aspirants today are the toppers. With the help of Unacademy, you get a chance to study under the guidance of the top educators of the country whom you see on your screen. Undoubtedly, these people have helped thousands of aspirants realize their dreams of qualifying civil services who are currently working as civil servants. So you get a chance to win under their guidance. You have a chance to study under their guidance, which will help you a lot in this examination, and you will be able to qualify this examination. My name is Shubham Sardhalia. I am your educator and mentor for UPSC CSE preparation. I'll be taking certain subjects like current affairs, history, science and technology, social issues, internal security. We are discussing NCERTs and some important announcement for you. Tomorrow we have the Unacademy Ultra Combat. This festive season give boost to your IES dream. Just before Diwali, you get a chance to win exciting prizes like MacBook, iPad, mobile, smartwatch, headphones. Tomorrow, enroll into this Unacademy Ultra Combat. It will be a gamified contest. It will be a live test where you will be asked certain questions from UPSC syllabus only, and if you are able to answer them well, you get a chance to win exciting prizes along with the scholarships worth crores of rupees. So coming on to our discussion, the last chapter for class 6th history NCERT. So we were discussing 6th class NCERT, and this is our last chapter for 6th class NCERT, buildings, paintings and books. For all those who haven't watched previous videos, I request you that each and every chapter that we study here has been discussed in depth, in detail in previous videos. You just have to go through those videos, you have to follow those videos, and you will be able to understand the things in a very smooth manner. You will be able to memorize, remember and understand them in a very nice manner. So the last chapter is named as building, paintings and books. So chapter number 11, building, paintings and books. So we'll first go through the NCERT textbook. So I'll just show you the PDF of NCERT textbook. We'll first discuss it from there, and then we'll come up on to our discussion for the notes that I provide you. So we are doing the NCERT in a way. Earlier I was just giving the summarized notes to you, but I got requests from certain students who wanted me to talk about or to start reading from the textbooks first, so that they get that feel that yeah, we are reading the NCERTs, and after that, once we are done with that, then we'll I'll give you those notes which are required for this preparation. So what we'll do is, I'll give you, after the class is over, I'll provide these PDFs to you through our Telegram channel. Those who haven't joined me, you can join us on Telegram. So that's how our NCERT history textbook chapter number 11 looks like for the class 6. So we'll talk about it. Chapter number 11, the name is buildings, paintings and books. So what are these buildings, paintings and books? So if you have followed me in the previous lectures, by now you must have understood that there were certain sources of history through which we got to know what is history, how the things were taking place and all that stuff. So these buildings, paintings and books, they became an important literary source when it comes to getting the idea about historical things, because there was nobody who was telling us. We had to find it out from the sources. So these books, these paintings, these buildings, these monuments, they became our sources. So like one such example is metallurgy, the things made out of various metals. They contributed in the major possible way. So there are major metallurgical history of the world. We talked about Indus Valley civilization, so we got to know about certain things because we were able to find out certain metals. If you remember, I told you that bronze was made mixing copper and tin. Then there were another metals which were being used during Indus Valley civilization. So metallurgy, because metal lasts for many years together, so this made us understand that people of this particular age were using these metals. One such example is the iron pillar at Mehrauli. If you happen to visit Qutub Minar, you must have come across this iron pillar of Mehrauli. It is 7.2-meter high and weighs over 3 tons, which was made some 1500 years ago. A pillar like this just in front of Qutub Minar. You can find it. This iron pillar, which is 1500 years old, still there is no sign of rust in it. You leave a iron rod, you leave a iron object outside for a few days, it will gather moisture, it will come under the influence of rain, and ultimately you may find that it starts rusting over a week or so. But this iron pillar has been there from last 1500 years, still there is no sign of rust. So it shows that how well these things were made, how strong these metals which were used by our ancestors. For example, this iron pillar dates back to the reign of Chandragupta, who was the ruler of Gupta dynasty. We talked about Gupta dynasty in our chapter number 10. So this iron pillar has certain things mentioned on it. There are certain inscriptions written on it which belong to Chandragupta of Gupta dynasty. Then we have certain buildings, bricks and stones. So other than iron metals, or other than these such pillars of made of various metals, we talked about buildings also. So there were certain buildings which were made using the help of bricks and stones. One such example is stupas. Stupas have been really important with respect to Buddhism. You go to any important Buddhist site, you will find certain stupas. You must have heard of Sanchi Stupa. So what was this stupa? Stupa term literally means mound. So stupa means mound. So there were several kinds of stupas. Some were round in shape, some were tall, some were big, some were small, but they all of them had certain things in common. There was a small box placed in the center or heart of the stupa. So what happened was, stupa was considered to be a religious, and it was considered to be of religious significance because it every stupa in its center had a box which contained certain things. This may contain bodily remains such as teeth, bone or ashes of Lord Buddha or his followers. So these stupas, all these stupas had to have certain common things, which were that every stupa had a box in its center which included things like teeth, bone or ashes of Lord Buddha or few of his followers. That's why it gained so much of religious significance. So people started worshipping stupas. People started worshipping, visiting these stupas. The box known as Relic Casket. So this small box that was placed in the center of each stupa was known by the name Relic Casket. It was covered with earth. Earth means layer of mud and bricks. Don't expect that entire earth planet was covering it, but earth here meant mud and bricks. Certain stupas had this dome-like structure, what you see here. So this is one such stupa at Sanchi, this famous Sanchi Stupa. So this is the famous Sanchi Stupa, how it looks like. It is round in shape and it is huge with certain carvings around it. Every stupa, at times the important stupas had a Pradakshina Path. Pradakshina is, what is Pradakshina? To move around. If you happen to visit temples or any other religious place, there are people seen revolving around the deity. So Pradakshina, they are taking that auspicious round path around the central deity is known as Pradakshina Path. So in various important stupas, we saw this Pradakshina Path that people could walk around the deity. This was surrounded by the railings. Entries of the path, these paths were having gateways. So devotees walked around these stupas. These stupas were magnificent. They were huge. They had huge stone carvings. You can see here various shapes are built. So these are all done on the stone. These are all stone carvings. Vikram Behra, hello, how are you? So Apart from these stupas, it was not just that iron pillars were there and buildings were there. Even people started cutting the rocks also. So we had huge rocks, people started cutting those rocks, people were making those rocks hollow. And what happens if a rock like this is cut from inside, it takes the shape of a cave. So followers of Buddha, they were living in those caves, and while living in those caves, in order to decorate those caves, they started doing certain paintings, certain carvings around them. Apart from these stupas, there were Hindu temples coming up which were worshipping deities like Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva, goddess Durga. And they were also built in a certain common pattern. For example, the most important part of the temple was the center where the deity was placed. Today also, if you go to a temple, there is a temple periphery, then there is a central part of the temple where the deity is actually placed. So this place was known as, what it was known by the name, Garbhagriha. We need to remember it. We'll find these things while we'll be studying about the architecture, ancient architecture of the country. Garbhagriha is the Sanctum Sanctorum. At times, about various temples, if certain temples are in news, so you come across these words, the Garbhagriha or Sanctum Sanctorum. So it was the central part of the temple in which the deity was placed, image of the chief deity was placed. So priests used to perform certain rituals, devotees offered their worship over there. Then there were certain places just like Bhitargaon, where we had a huge tower which was known as Shikhara. So the temple structure was something like this. You see a dome-shaped temple, and there was something at the top of the dome which was known as Shikhar. So Shikhar was actually meant to represent the Garbhagriha. Exactly above the top of the Sanctum Sanctorum or the Garbhagriha, we had a tower-shaped structure. This was known as what? It was known as Shikhar. Shikhara or Shikhar. So we need to remember Garbhagriha was the central place where the chief deity was made to sit. Then at the top of the roof of this Garbhagriha, we had Shikhars, and then there was a open space where people used to assemble. This was known as what? Mandapa. So Mandap, Garbhagriha and Shikhar. So these three names we need to remember. You go to a temple, you can visualize in this in your mind. What happens is, you enter a temple, there is a huge area where people sit. Usually people are doing certain stuff. So you can sit over there, you must find a priest sitting over there. Then you go further inside, you find the area where deity is placed. So that is the Garbhagriha. So the outside place where you can sit for a while, where people can assemble at times, is Mandap or Mandapa. You move inside, you go to the central or the chief deity, you find the place which is known as Garbhagriha. And at the top of Garbhagriha, outside at the rooftop, you find Shikhar. So such examples are in Mahabalipuram and Ahol. You find some of the finest temples of those times. So who were building these stupas? How were these temples built? So undoubtedly they were built by certain craftsmen. They were built by certain people who were funded by the kings. So kings and queens decided to build, because it was an expensive affair. You cannot build a temple or you cannot build a stupa with some small amount of money. It requires a lot of money. So it was an expensive affair. So it was done only by the kings and queens. So in order to make these stupas and the temples last the longest possible, the best quality of stones were found. So whenever king decided to build a stupa, first good quality of stones were found, then they were transported to a place where this new stupa or a new temple building was to be constructed. These hard rough blocks of stones were shaped in and carved into pillars, floors and whatnot. So today if you go and see any of these ancient temples, you find beautiful carvings of the king's coat, at times of the face of deity, at times of the animals like elephants, etc. So they were carved out on the pieces of stones. It became really difficult. So all these things were made out by the craftsmen. So kings and queens, they were probably spending a lot of money from their treasury in order to build such temples. If you see in this image, you can clearly find the people working on the walls in order to make certain stupas or certain temples. Stupa at Sanchi is one such example. So people who were involved, the craftsmen who were involved in building these temples and stupas, they were given a lot of money. They were given certain gifts from the king's side. Then men and women were involved in construction. So the first thing from where we got to know about the past were the metallurgy or the metal pillars, etc. Then we talked about buildings like stupas and temples. Then another source of the history were the paintings. Even today also you find, if you go talk about Ajanta caves, you find monasteries, you find certain places where people had drawn certain beautiful paintings. The dark caves were from inside, were lit with the help of torches, and then paintings were made. And even these paintings are as old as 1500 to 1800 years ago. Still they have beautiful colors in them. The splendid work of art remains over there. You see, these type of paintings were drawn on the floors of, on the walls of caves. So this was done in great detail. Even the minutest details were taken care of. Then, so metallurgy was the source, the buildings, the stupas, the temples were the source, then paintings were the source. Then we had the world of books. By this time, like somewhere 1500 years ago, people started writing books. So there were long books written which were known as epics. So we need to remember this. What were epics? The long books written that were the compositions of heroic men and women. The famous Tamil epic, we need to remember these names: Silapa di Karam. Sillapadikaram was composed by a poet named Ilango. So there is a story of a merchant. Some 1800 years ago, there was a merchant whose name was Kovalan. So Kovalan, he was married, uh, but he fell in love with another girl whose name was Madhavi. He started neglecting his wife Kannagi, but later Kannagi and that uh, Kovalan the merchant, they left that place and went to some another place where he was accused of theft, and he was given the death sentence. So all these things were happening. So these sources were the from where we got to know about it. We got to know about this from the various books. So just like this Sillapadikaram, we had another Tamil epic. The name was Mani Mekalai. It was composed by Satanar around 1400 years ago. This is the further in continuation with the previous story. So it talks about the daughter of Kavalan and Madhavi. These beautiful compositions were lost to scholars, but eventually things were recovered in the forms of manuscripts. We had various famous writers such as Kali Dasa. We talked about Kali Dasa in previous chapter also. So he started writing in Sanskrit. We talked about his composition Meghdut in last chapter. Then there were number of Hindu religious stories that were in circulation. People came to know about Puranas. So we talked about Vedas in previous classes. This there was something known as Puranas. Purana literal term is old. So these were the texts which talked about certain old stories of gods and goddesses such as Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva, Goddess Durga or Parvati. Parvati. They also contained details on how these to be worshipped. So we need to remember the Puranas had talked about various Hindu deities, how should we worship them, the rituals were mentioned here. The Puranas were written in simple Sanskrit language, if you remember. They were written in Sanskrit and were meant to be heard by everybody, including women and Shudras. We talked in previous chapters that Vedas, it was not everybody was allowed to read Veda. Only certain people, like the kings, the noblemen, and the Brahmins were allowed to read Vedas, but women and Shudras were not allowed to read Vedas. But they were allowed to read Puranas. So every individual, irrespective of his gender, irrespective of his caste, they were allowed to read these Vedas. During those times, the epic, important epics were written. One such example is the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, the most important religious books. The Mahabharata, the Ramayana we talk about. So Mahabharata is a story about the war between the Kauravas and Pandavas for their capital in Hastinapur. It is one of its kind. It finds the mention of Bhagavad Gita in it. We talked about Bhagavad Gita in previous chapters also. Then Ramayana is the story of exile of Lord Rama. So these Mahabharata, these Ramayana, they were written as they were considered as the sources of earliest texts. So what I'm trying to tell you is from where we were able to grasp certain knowledge, we were able to grasp certain information of the past. So we had metallurgy, that metal pillars, etc. We had buildings like stupas and temples. Then we talked about paintings, and then we talked about books. So these were the stories, Puranas, the epics that were written about the kings. But then there were certain stories which talked about ordinary people also. These were known as what? Jatakas. So ordinary people also told stories. They composed poems, they sang, they danced. So all these things were mentioned in the form of Jataka stories. and the Panch Tantra. These words are important. You may be asked at times, what are Jataka stories? So Jatakas were the stories of a common man. So we got to know a lot of things about the Jataka stories. There were certain stories mentioned in it. Then eventually, after writing about the history, after writing about the life of common people, after writing about the life of kings, there were certain books which were related to science. One such example, the famous mathematician and astronomer Aryabhatta, who in Sanskrit is known by the name Aryabhatyam. Stated that day and night were caused by the rotation of the earth. So he gave the evidences, or he gave the explanation to one of the most complicated events when nobody was ready to believe that earth was moving. He told that earth was rotating, that's why day and nights were caused, and it was giving rise to day and night. He talked about the eclipses. He gave a scientific explanation to eclipses. He also found the way of calculating circumference of a circle, what we use today. Then we had people like Brahmvira, Brahmagupta, Bhaskaracharya. They were mathematicians, they were astronomers. The one such important contribution by Aryabhatta is of zero. Without zero, there was no counting possible. Aryabhatta gave the concept of zero, which ultimately is adopted worldwide to calculate today. India gave the gift of Ayurveda. We talked about famous physicians, the Maharishi Charak, who was a learned man of Ayurveda. He told the world about Ayurveda. Then we had Sushrut. So Maharishi Charak talked about Ayurveda in his book Charak Samhita, and then Rishi Sushrut talked about surgery in his book Sushrut Samhita. So we gave the world the scientific knowledge, we gave the world the concepts of mathematics like zero, we gave the world the concept of medicine, we gave the world the concept of Ayurveda. So all these things were given by whom? All these things were given to the world by India, and that's we have been talking about in these classes. I hope we are clear with it. If we just have a look at the question, so what was Stupa? Stupa was a mount. What was Shikhar? Shikhar was a tower at the top of Garbhagriha. What is Mandapa? Mandapa was a place where people could assemble. Garbhagriha was the place where deity was installed. Pradakshina Path, it was a circular path around the Stupa. So these things we studied in this chapter. Now we'll go back to the summary of this chapter, which you need to remember, which you need to revise time and again so that you don't forget it before the examination. So we'll just have the overview summary of what we studied in the class. So people started writing books. It was like building paintings and books. So initial sources were metallurgy, the metal pillars, like one at Mehroli, the metal pillars, the metallurgy was the source. Then buildings were the source. People were studying about the buildings. These buildings were in the form of stupas, then there were buildings in the form of temples. Then we had paintings. We saw paintings on the walls of Ajanta caves. We saw books like Mahabharata, Ramayana. Then we saw books like Jataka stories. Certain books were written which were scientific in nature by, for example, people like Aryabhatta, Sushrut Samhita, Charak Samhita. They wrote certain books. So people started writing books. These books were long and composed. They were composed and compiled during these periods. Epics were grand, long compositions about the heroic men, women, and God. So there were two types of books. One were the epics. So epics talked about heroic men and women and God. So if we have a look at Ramayana and Mahabharata, Ramayana and Mahabharata both are epics. So they talked about certain lords. They talked about heroic men and women. They talked about Lord Rama. They talked about Bhagavad Gita. Then there were another books which were written about common people. They were written by common people about common people. They were known as Jataka stories. So there were Jataka stories. There were epics. Then people started building temples. Temples were built uh, in order to worship deities like Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva, Goddess Durga. Then people started to understand certain things from the iron pillars. For example, iron pillar at Mehroli, some 1500-year old, which is still not rusted. Then paintings were there. Ajanta is famous for several paintings. The rocks were made hollow from inside. The people who stayed in those rocks, they drew certain paintings. Then we talked about Silpa Kadikaram. Silpadikaram, sorry, I get confused while pronouncing it. Silpadikaram. It was a book composed. It was a Tamil epic actually. So it was composed by a poet named Ilango. He composed it. It was a love story of a merchant and his wife Kannagi. The epic mentioned about the incidents that happened in Madurai. So it talked about Madurai because it was a Tamil epic. Then poets like Kalidasa came up. Kalidasa during this period wrote a lot about Sanskrit literature. There were Kalidasa texts just like Malvikagni Mitra, Abhigyan Shakuntalam, Vikram Varsiha, Raghuvansham, Kumar Sambhava were some of the popular works of poet Kalidasa. Then people talked about Puranas. Puranas meant old. So, unlike Vedas, Puranas were written in Sanskrit, and every individual, be it women, be it Shudras, were allowed to read this. Many Puranas, such as Mahabharata and Ramayana, were written during this period. The Puranas contain stories about gods, Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva, Goddess Durga. Then, in buildings, we talked about stupa. Stupa meant a mound. It was a building which may be a round in shape, which may be tall, it may be big, it may be small. The common thing about all these stupas was a relic casket, a small box which was contained inside, which was placed inside the stupa so that it gets a religious significance. That relic casket could contain a remains such as a tooth, a bone, or ash of Lord Buddha or his followers, which all these things they gave religious significance to these stupas. That's why these stupas became religiously important. Even today, people from far off places come and visit these uh, stupas. Then books were written on science. Aryabhatta, a mathematician and astronomer who wrote a book of science by the name Aryabhatta. He also explained the scientific explanation of eclipse. He told that Earth rotates on its axis, which gives rise to day and night. Zero was invented during this period only. Madurai was one of such examples, which was known for its temples. The Tamil Sangam assembly, we have been talking about Sangam literature. So Sangam was the assembly of poets where they were Tamil poets were writing certain things. So it was Sangam literature. The Great Stupa located at Sanchi, I showed you in the image also. It dates back to the period of Ashoka and the best architectural evidence of Buddhist history. We had monolithic temples. What were monolithic? This we need to remember. Monolithic, mono term comes from one. So huge temple that was carved out of a huge single rock. So what happened? There was a huge rock somewhere. People started carving it out. The craftsmen, the experts, they started carving it out and they created. For example, there was a one such rock. It was turned into a temple by certain carvings. So this was known as monolithic temple when a entire temple was built with the help of was built carving out of a single rock. This was monolithic. These temples can be seen near Mahabalipuram, near Chennai city. So monolithic temples, I hope you will remember. Then there is iron pillar, we already talked about it. This stupa of Sanchi. Amravati also sees a magnificent stupa. There are certain stupas in Mahabalipur. There are certain temples, monolithic temples in Mahabalipuram in Aihole. It was an expensive affair. I told you that building stupa or building temple was never a easy task because it required a lot of money. So only kings and queens could afford making stupas or getting these stupas built. So kings and queens were paying craftsmen for these stupas. They spent money on their treasury to pay the craftspeople who worked to build such buildings. Then paintings of Ajanta were famous. They were done in the caves. There were poets like uh, Ilango and Satanar who were writing certain texts in southern part of India. There were poets like Kalidasa. There were Puranas. There were Sanskrit verse. There were epics like Ramayana, Mahabharata. There were Jataka stories which were about the common. So that's what was mentioned. That's what was there in our chapter 11th for class 6th NCERT. This was the last chapter for class 6th NCERT. Are we able to follow it? Are we clear with it or not? Are we clear with it or not? See, if you were reading this on your own, it would have taken a lot of time. You would be confused that what are the things to be remembered, what are the things we need to memorize. So here what is happening is now you need to read this much which I provide you as PDFs, and you will be done with your NCERT chapter number 11 for class 6. And in this a very similar format we have already discussed previous chapters also. We'll be starting with class 7th NCERT tomorrow. Then after completing 7th we'll go up to 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and in this way, and all the NCERT chapter wise starting from class 6 to 12th we will be covering. I hope we are clear with it. So these type of lectures are really important. You can join me at 1 p.m. every day for geography NCERTs. You join me at 3 p.m. for history NCERT. Then at 5 p.m. you can join me me for current events on our channel UPSC 101. And apart from that, at 7 p.m. you can join me for this special class on the Unacademy application. You simply have to install the Unacademy application. There you will get free special classes, free live classes. You can join me there. So this is my schedule for upcoming days. You can join me and we will be discussing certain things. Each and everything discussed in these classes is very important from exam perspective. And the most important thing is, if you want to cover the entire syllabus, which is unavoidable if you want to qualify this examination, see, decision is entirely yours. If you wish to qualify this examination, you will have to go through the entire syllabus, which can be done with the help of plus and iconic subscriptions of Unacademy. You can enroll with us in our subscriptions using this code IAS Icons. Don't forget to use this code, because this code will fetch you maximum discount. By the very similar name IAS Icons, you can join us on Telegram. We have a Telegram channel where I'll be uploading PDFs of all the lectures. Thank you very much. All the best. Keep working hard. Bye bye. Take care. Jai Hind.